Okay, second half of biology. Here we go. Well, less than second half. We're going to start with section 7, Islam. Both Christians and Muslims part company with materialistic worldviews that deny the existence of God and assert a naturalistic origin and evolution of the world. As Badru D. Katarega says, Muslims, like Christians, do witness that God is the creator. As creator, he is other than creation. He is not nature. He is above and beyond his creation or transcendent. Muslims believe that God's creation is perfect. The Islamic view of how things came to be is called special creation. The Quran describes the universe as finely ordered, illustrating God's magnificent mind in designing it. It is he who hath created for you all things that are on the earth. Moreover, his design comprehended the heavens, for he gave order and perfection to the seven firmaments, and of all things he hath perfect knowledge. Quran 2:29. Blessed is he who made constellations in the skies and placed therein a lamp and a moon giving light. And it is he who made the night and the day to follow each other. Quran 25:61. He has created man. He has taught him speech and intelligence. The sun and the moon follow courses exactly computed, and the herbs and the tree both alike bow in adoration, and the firmament has he raised high. Quran 55:3-7. For Muslims, the order of the universe provides evidence of God's existence and creative activity, and Muslim philosophers and poets have written beautifully about this manifestation of God. The Pakistani Muslim scholar Khurshid Ahmad writes, "How can one observe the inexhaustible creativity of nature, its purposefulness, its preservation of that which is morally useful and destruction of that which is socially injurious, and yet fail to draw the conclusion that behind nature there is an all-pervading mind, of whose incessant creative activity the processes of nature are but an outward manifestation? The stars scattered through the almost infinite space, the vast panorama of nature with its charm and beauty, the planned waxing and waning of the moon, the astonishing harmony of the seasons all point towards one fact. There is a God, the creator, the governor. We witness a superb, flawless plan in the universe. Can it be without a planner? We see great enchanting beauty and harmony in its working. Can it be without a creator? We observe wonderful design in nature. Can it be without a designer? We feel a lofty purpose in physical and human existence. Can it be without a will working behind it? We find that the universe is like a superbly written, fascinating novel. Can it be without an author? Divine authorship to Muslims is proof of a divine author. In this way, Islam and Christianity arrive at similar conclusions. Most Muslims reject evolutionary theories on both religious and scientific grounds. As professor of Islamic studies, Saeed Hossein Nasir, this has created a conflict in some Muslim quarters. For a notable segment of modernized Muslims, evolution remains practically like a religious article of faith, whose overt contradiction of the teachings of the Quran they fail to realize. Those who think they are rendering a service to Islam by incorporating evolutionary ideas into Islamic thought are in fact falling into a most dangerous pit and are surrendering Islam to one of the most insidious pseudo-dogmas of modern man, created in 18th and 19th centuries to enable men to forget God. Not only do Muslims wrestle with whether to accept evolution, they're also divided over whether to advocate an old or young earth. While many more traditional Muslims take the reference to evening and morning in Genesis 1 as 24 hours in duration, some contemporary Muslim spokesmen hold that the days of creation were long periods of time, though they do not normally advocate evolutionary theories. Badru Katarega writes, "The earth and universe were created by God through a long step-by-step process. The Quranic witness further testifies that God created the heavens and the earth and what is between them in 6 periods, and no weariness touched him. Quran 50:38. God created the universe and the earth in an orderly step-by-step progression. By and large, it seems that Muslims who have adopted evolutionary theory have done so due to the influence of secular education in the West, or the importation of such theories into Muslim lands. In this regard, Muslim evolutionists have been influenced much like Christian evolutionists have been. Because of the tension over origins in the Muslim community, the contemporary intelligent design movement has drawn the attention of some Muslim scientists and theorists. Mustafa Akyol, a Muslim writer based in Turkey, writes, ID, or intelligent design, presents a new perspective on science, one that is based solely on scientific evidence, yet is fully compatible with faith in God. That's why William Dembski, one of its leading theorists, defines intelligent design as a bridge between science and theology. As the history of the cultural conflict between the modern West and Islam shows, intelligent design can also be a bridge between these two civilizations. The first bricks of that bridge are now being laid in the Islamic world. In Turkey, the current debate over ID has attracted much attention in the Islamic media. Islamic newspapers are publishing translations of pieces by the leading figures of the ID movement, such as Michael J. Behe and Philip E. Johnson. The Discovery Institute is praised in their news stories and depicted as the vanguard in the case for God. Now, for the first time, Muslims are discovering that they share a common cause with the believers in the West. Akyol goes on to say, of course, Darwinians have the right to believe in whatever they wish, but it is crucial to unveil that theirs is a subjective faith, not an objective truth, as they have been claiming for more than a century. This unveiling would mark a turning point in the history of Western civilization by reconciling science and religion and letting people become intellectually fulfilled theists. This is good news for Christians wishing to dialogue with Muslims. There are certain places where there is common ground, and the question of biology turns out to be one of them. Muslims affirm the existence of God and his creation of the universe. They maintain a creator-creature distinction, as do Christians. They also believe that the design of the universe points to the existence of a designer. While some modernized Muslims have adopted evolutionary theories, as have some Christians, Orthodox Muslims see such naturalistic theories as conflicting with the teachings of the Quran and Muhammad. Christianity. Much of the case for Christian view of biology revolves around origins. How did everything come about? Some biologists say it doesn't matter. Life is life, and no matter how it came about, we just seek to study it for what it is. To a certain extent, that is true. Biologists who are evolutionists and creationists can work side by side and get a lot done without ever referencing the issue of origins. Still, where things came from and how they got here is an important consideration. If the story of naturalistic evolution is true, if life arose by naturalistic random processes, then at some point in time, non-living matter must have become alive. This affects our theories and hypotheses about how biology works and even how we categorize living organisms. Our theology affects our science, and this is true for believers and non-believers alike. Along with Islam, Christianity affirms special creation, and at some point and at some level, life resulted from a creative act of God. The field of biology, and especially the origin of life, is highly relevant, even integral to our understanding of our faith. How life arose and who, if anyone, made it happen are the ground zero questions in the battle for all other ideas. When it comes to origins, the Bible's claims seem to be at odds with much of what has been popular in science in the past 150 years. For example, while the Bible says God created our first parents, Adam and Eve, fully formed, evolutionary science says all living things evolved through random chance processes, starting with nothing. In addition, mainstream theories of cosmic evolution posit a very old universe, somewhere between 13 and 15 billion years old. A straightforward reading of Genesis 1 implies to some a more recent creation. Disagreements between Christianity and other worldviews aside, we also face the problem of camp skirmishes among Christians. How do we interpret and respond to biological evolution's account of life's origins? In the last century, perhaps no other aspect of Christianity has troubled believers more than this. Because many biologists, both Christian and non-Christian, treat evolution as a scientific fact, Christians have struggled to reconcile their faith in the Bible with the claims of science. Over time, three main views of origins have emerged among Christians: young age creationism, as progressive creation, and theistic evolution. Young age creationism is as recently as 6,000 years ago, God created each living organism separately, in much its present form. Progressive creation is the idea that God created each living organism separately, in much its present form, with the capacity to change and adapt to its circumstances over time, though within limits. God created human beings separately at a much later time. And then theistic evolution. God works through the natural processes of evolution. All three groups would agree that the universe, and especially life on Earth, bears the marks of a designer. But beyond that, these are major differences in the Christian community. They must not be taken lightly. Yet for the purposes of this chapter, we will attend to and defend the fact of creation itself, not its timing. Specifically, we will defend the idea that God created humankind, not the other way around. As Oxford University mathematician John Lennox phrases it, Genesis affirms that human life has a chemical base, but Genesis denies the reductionist addendum of the materialist, that life is nothing but chemistry. Our approach of focusing on commonalities will unfortunately be dissatisfying to many readers, but in this chapter, as in others, we seek to find common ground for Christians to occupy with one another in defending the larger Christian worldview. If we fail to find common ground on the issue of how life arose, we risk yielding the ground unnecessarily to those committed to its destruction. Lennox explains, the question of the origin of humans. Are we made in the image of God, or thrown upon the sea of the possible random permutations of matter without any ultimate significance? This question is of major importance for our concept of our human identity, and it is therefore not surprising that ferocious efforts are being made to minimize the difference between humans and animals on the one hand, and the difference between humans and machines on the other. Such efforts are driven at least in part by the secular conviction that naturalism must in the end triumph over theism by its reductionist arguments in removing the last vestige of God from his creation. Human beings must in the end be approved to be nothing but physics and chemistry. Will naturalistic arguments triumph over theistic ones? Many secularists, Marxists, and postmodernists think it must necessarily be so. But before we yield any ground, let's at least consider 5 reasons why the Christian idea of a designer should not be dismissed out of hand. The first reason, life comes only from pre-existing life. If you start with nothing, you end with nothing. But the late Nobel Prize winner George Wald of Harvard University stubbornly insisted that the reasonable view was to believe in spontaneous generation because it was the only alternative to believing in a single primary act of supernatural creation. More recently, Harvard chemist George Whitesides made a similar admission. Most chemists believe, as do I, that life emerged spontaneously from mixtures of molecules in the prebiotic earth. How? I have no idea. Ironically, Wald's and Whiteside's conclusions match atheist writer Victor Stenger's definition of faith as belief in the absence of supportive evidence and even in the light of contrary evidence. Stenger's definition, we think, is not a very good one. Still, given his own belief in a strictly natural origin of life, this is a clear instance of science biting its own hand in the act of feeding. Second, random chance processes do not produce intelligible information. Cambridge-trained philosopher of science Stephen Meyer posed a simple thought experiment about this. In his experiment, he left his classroom of college students for 1 hour picking Scrabble tiles at random and writing them on the board. Now, imagine that upon my return, they showed me a detailed message on the blackboard such as Einstein's famous dictum, "God does not play dice with the universe." Would it be more reasonable for me to suppose that they had cheated or that they had gotten lucky? Clearly, I should suspect strongly that they had cheated. I should reject the chance hypothesis. Why? I should reject chance as the best explanation, not only because of the improbability of the sequence my students had generated, but also because of what I knew about the probabilistic resources available to them. If I had made a prediction before I had left the room, I would have predicted that they could not have generated a sequence of that length by chance alone in the time available. The problem is even more complex than Meyer's example, though. How would he recognize that the sentence the students presumably came up with, by the way of their prank, was actually intelligible? He could do this only if he had a language, a system of words, a syntax, and other elements of a language, all created through thoughtful design, to even recognize that their sentence had meaning. What is the source of these building blocks of language? In our experience, language and information-rich systems always come from intelligence. This makes it all the more striking that life itself is built upon a language-based code in our DNA. 3. The immaterial world is real. Erwin Schrödinger phrased this in a fascinating way. My body functions as a pure mechanism according to the laws of nature. Yet I know by incontrovertible direct experience that I am directing its motions, of which I foresee by the effects that may be fateful and all-important, in which case I feel and take full responsibility for them. The only possible inference from these two facts is, I think that I in the widest meaning of the word, that is to say, every conscious mind that has ever said or felt I am the person, if any, who controls the motion of the atoms according to the laws of nature. As a person, Schrödinger knew his person was in charge of his body, not the other way around. Mind over matter, or perhaps mind preceding matter. This is very much the approach found in John 1:1 when Scripture says, "In the beginning was the Word." The Greek word for capital W word, logos, entails the expression of a thought. Thought preceded creation. That thoughts are real things and yet not material things implies the presence of an immaterial reality such as a soul. 4. Living organisms give the appearance of design. William Paley asked, if you found a watch in a field, is it more reasonable to assume that it had just materialized or that it had a maker? Since the 19th century, however, it has been widely believed that Paley's argument for a universal designer was effectively answered by the philosopher David Hume, who claimed that Paley's analogy between living things and machines was unfounded. Life, it was argued, does not need an intelligent designer as machines do. Atheist Richard Dawkins followed Hume in this line of thinking, writing in The Blind Watchmaker, "Biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. We do not need to postulate God as the designer, he says, since natural selection can perform the miracles. In spite of Dawkins' claims, scientists can no longer ignore the idea of design. Recent discoveries reveal that life is indeed analogous to the most complex machinery, making the case for design in biology far stronger than Paley ever imagined. We now know that life is fundamentally based upon an information-rich, language-based code in our DNA that contains computer-like commands that provide instructions for building molecular machines that operate at near 100% energetic efficiency inside of cells. As Bruce Alberts, former president of the U.S. National Academy of Science, observes, the entire cell can be viewed as a factory that contains an elaborate network of interlocking assembly lines, each of which is composed of a set of large protein machines. Like machines invented by humans to deal efficiently with the macroscopic world, these protein assemblies contain highly coordinated moving parts. Biochemist Michael Behe calls these molecular machines irreducibly complex. Irreducible complexity requires many parts in order to function and cannot evolve in a step-by-step Darwinian fashion. If Darwinism can't do the job, then what in our experience can? Produce information, computer-like code, and factories with machines that we find in life. We know of only one cause that can produce these things: intelligence. Stephen Meyer explains this positive argument for design. Our experience-based knowledge of information flow confirms that systems with large amounts of specified complexity, especially codes and languages, invariably originate from an intelligent source, from a mind or personal agent. In the same spirit, Michael Denton, a molecular biologist, stated, Paley was not only right in asserting the existence of an analogy between life and machines, but was also remarkably prophetic in guessing that the technological ingenuity realized in living systems is vastly in excess of anything yet accomplished by man. At present, we think intelligent design is a fascinating explanation for the informative, rich genetic codes and nanomachines that build all life. 5. Scientists themselves are bailing on the theory of evolution as currently constructed. A 2009 article in Trends in Genetics argued that breakdowns in core neo-Darwinian tenets, such as the traditional concept of the tree of life, or the view that natural selection is the main driving force of evolution, indicate that the modern synthesis has crumbled, apparently beyond repair. According to the article, all major tenets of the modern synthesis have been, if not outright overturned, replaced by a new and incomparably more complex vision of the key aspects of evolution. Sorry, that was a long sentence. It concludes, not to mince words, the modern synthesis is gone. Likewise, a 2011 paper in Biological Theory concluded Darwinism in its current scientific incarnation has pretty much reached the end of its rope. To be fair, it is difficult to find a scientist today who thinks Darwin had it all right. There were many things Darwin did not know and could not have known based on the scientific discoveries known to him a century and a half ago. But even the Darwinian ideas that have been commonly accepted, such as the famous tree of life, are now coming under attack. A 2012 paper in the Annual Review of Genetics challenged universal common ancestry and concluded that life might indeed have multiple origins. Likewise, a 2009 article in New Scientist titled why Darwin was wrong about the tree of life, observe that many biologists now argue that the tree concept is obsolete and needs to be discarded. The article quoted scientists saying things like, "We have no evidence at all that the tree of life is a reality," or "We've just annihilated the tree of life." As for the creative power of mutations, U.S. National Academy of Sciences member biologist Lynn Margulis maintained that the new mutations don't create new species. They create offspring that are impaired. She explained, "The Darwinian claim to explain all of evolution is a popular half-truth whose lack of explicative power is compensated for only by the religious ferocity of its rhetoric. Mutations, in summary, tend to induce sickness, death, or deficiencies. No evidence in the vast literature of heredity changes shows unambiguous evidence that random mutations itself, even with geographical isolation of populations, leads to speciation or new species." These stunning admissions led Stephen Meyer to make an apt observation in his book Darwin's Doubt. Rarely has there been such a great disparity between the popular perception of a theory and its actual standing in relevant peer-reviewed scientific literature. With so much compelling information coming to light, Christians should think twice before rejecting the idea of a creator and accepting macroevolutionary processes as a rational explanation for what life is and where it came from. The information and machinery of life appears to have been designed, but that's not the whole story. Life requires many other factors to exist. As science professor Joe Francis notes, water, oxygen, and light, three of the most basic necessary requirements for life, can be extremely toxic to living things. But living organisms possess complex protection mechanisms built into each living cell, which appear to have protected life from its very first appearance on Earth. Intelligence is required to explain how all these coordinated parts and components were arranged to allow life to exist. Be warned, though, talk of a Christian view of biology is like poking a yellow jacket nest. You're practically guaranteed that those committed to naturalism and materialism will attack. Jonathan Wells explains a common argument used to do so. Historian of science Gregory Raddick summarizes the Darwinist principle argument as follows: "No designer worth his salt would have created the features that we actually find in nature." It would be hard to exaggerate the importance of this argument. Raddick wrote, "From Darwin's day to our own, as a means of disqualifying the designer explanation and making room for Darwinian descent with modification." Richard Dawkins offers one example of this "no designer worth his salt would have created" argument when he says that up to 95% of our genetic code no longer does anything useful. No truly good designer would create so much waste, he insists. But as Wells painstakingly demonstrates, the idea that most DNA is uneaten leftovers from an evolutionary process is simply false. He concludes, "A virtual flood of recent evidence shows that they are mistaken. Much of the DNA they claim to be junk actually performs important functions in living cells." It would be a mistake to just take our word for it or to draw a lifelong conclusion about what we have covered in this brief chapter. But hopefully it is clear that God as designer is not an unreasonable position for either science or faith, certainly not any more unreasonable than ignoring design and believing in spontaneous generation. Don't expect naturalists and materialists, for whom the concept of a supernatural being can never be tolerated, to just change their minds. Many believe, as one scientist said, science must be provisionally atheistic or cease to be itself. For Christian biologists, however, the world is bright and resonant in the light of God's existence. As a piece of art suggests an ardor, As a piece of art suggests an artist. The orderly universe and complexity of life suggest a designer. This is what makes true discovery possible and makes these discoveries meaningful. From the biblical perspective, having a sense of what life is and where it comes from is only the first of two big questions. If humans are both body and soul, we must explore the fascinating world of the soul. This is precisely what the field of psychology is designed to do, and it is to the misuses and possible redemption of psychology that we next turn our attention. The end.